Beautiful sound there. All right. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome. We are so grateful that you have joined us this evening, and we're so grateful to Uri for taking time to um, teach us and to learn with us this evening. Many of you know Uri very well, clearly, from your congregational trip to Israel last summer. But for those of you who don't, Uri has been a Jewish educator for 25 years. Born in the US, Uri immigrated to Israel when he was 10, grew up in Jerusalem, served in the IDF, and then traveled the world. Uri has a master's degree from the Hebrew University in Contemporary Jewish Studies and was a Jewish history teacher for North American teens in semester programs in Israel for many years. Uri spent 3 years in the U.S. with his wife and three daughters, where he served as the interim director of education of Temple Israel of Boston. A licensed tour guide since 1999, Uri has worked as a tour educator for a wide range of groups, including Synagogue, Federation, URJ, and CCR Leadership, Interfaith, Multi-Generational, and more. He has guided Jewish heritage trips throughout Europe and has lectured on Israel and Jewish identity across North America. In the wake of the October 7th war, with so many uncertainties and two daughters in the military, Uri has joined Israeli civil society, helping where he can. He has also reharnessed the tools of his trade to partner with and help the North American Jewish community and himself grapple with and strengthen their knowledge of what has happened, how this has affected Israel, and why we feel the way we feel. This has been done through remote teaching and Zoom solidarity trips to Israel in these challenging times and in-person visits to North America. Uri and his family live in the city of Modi'in and are active members of the Reform congregation Yozma. Uri's experience has been driven by a clear desire to share the power of the land and state of Israel, to strengthen Jewish identity and a connection with the Jewish people. With his unique perspective, Uri recognizes that this process includes building bridges and having the ability to inspire and to be inspired. So, with great honor and excitement, I am thrilled to turn it over to Uri.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Erdheim. It really is I want to say it's a pleasure to be here, but it's very meaningful to be here, I would say, and I'm grateful for the fact that you want to be here and that you want to be a part of this. And of course, your congregation, Bethel, will have the recording for those who aren't, if you feel that there's others who want to also engage. And I am speaking to you right now from my home in Modi'in, and just a week or so, week and a half, the holiday of Hanukkah is going to begin, and actually, literally just down the road from what is probably one of the newest cities in the world. The groundbreaking for the city of Modi'in was back in 1994, but it sits on the ruins of one of the most ancient cities in the world, and that is, of course, the city of Modi'in that we know from the story of Hanukkah. And just down the road, there is, in fact, an ancient synagogue and a mikveh dated to the years in which Hanukkah was being invented. We don't know if that's where the story actually took place. It could be that it took place somewhere else, or even if this was the ancient city of Modi'in. But we do know there was a synagogue, and it was in use 2,300 years ago, which is, as I said, right around when Hanukkah was being invented. So the old and the new mesh together. And I'll say that one of the reasons that I enjoy doing what I do up until October 7th, and that is both as a tour guide, teaching Jewish history, etc., is that it allows me to engage in that history, in the past. And it allows me and those who travel with me to decide how much of ourselves we place in the story and how much distance we want to take on as we try and gain perspective on the events that were, with which to better understand what's going on now. And what we're about to share as we go through the next hour and a half or so together is not about the past, even though it is kind of about the past, but we're actually in the middle of it as we speak. So of the differences that I found myself having to grapple with is a reality in which I'm sharing a story that we are all in the midst of making even as we speak. And there's a fundamental difference there that I wouldn't have necessarily cognitively assumed before October 7th. And being in the midst of it, I absolutely realize and recognize. So that's more a full disclosure, I would say, all things on the table. The other thing I'll add before we begin is that our evening together is going to be less about the step-by-step facts of what happened on October 7th and since. And there's time and place to be able to discuss that for sure, but that's not the goal of our evening. Our evening is to tap in to how Israel and Israelis, and perhaps the Jewish world at large, but focused on Israel and Israelis, are feeling. What is our psychological state, our emotional state? And we're going to do that through some music, some street art, some poetry, most of which was all created post October 7th. And that will be a window in. Essentially, it's pulling you into a conversation that Israelis are having with each other. So that's the essence of what we're going to do, and we're going to do it through the means of a presentation, PowerPoint. There'll be slides with poetry, music, etc. And at times you'll see the lyrics on the screen next to the song being sung. Sometimes there'll be subtitles. That's how we're going to run things. I will say, however, in that vein, that as a tour guide, and I can imagine as a rabbi as well, we have the ability to use our words in such a way that generates or maybe exposes emotion that's already there. And we have to be careful not to emotionally manipulate anyone when we speak. The reason I want to point that out is because what we're going to go through this evening is not that. It is an emotional presentation. And on the other side, I have to be aware that even though I'm wary of not emotionally manipulating anyone, I don't want to be afraid to present something or shy away from presenting something just because it's got some serious weight to it because of the topic that we're discussing. So again, I'm going to put that out there. So take it for as you wish, and we'll jump right in. Oh, as far as questions, this isn't the classic lesson in which I speak a little, there'll be questions, I'll answer, we'll discuss, we'll move on, which is an excellent way of teaching. This is not going to be that. Rather, it's more sharing what I can from my perspective, and I'm happy to stick around at the end, although we are going to do an hour and a half, so I've got strength if you do to answer any questions. But if there's anything burning that you feel you need answered in the moment, feel free to put it in the chat, and Rabbi Erdheim is going to go ahead and she'll grab me. All right, so that's where we go. And of course, technology is wonderful as long as it's wonderful. And if there's any glitches, then we'll be in touch and we'll reconnect. Okay, I'm going to jump right in. Okay. Now, you will see that what we call this, when the melody doesn't change, but the words make all the difference, an iconic song hits a powerful chord, opens our souls, even as we find the writing of the prophets written in more place than one. We're actually going to begin not on October 7th, 2023, but we're going to take a half a step back first to give ourselves a little bit of background. And we're actually starting in 1973. And in 1973, as of course, those of you who have been to Israel, either with me or with others, I'm sure you learned about, if not even here in Israel, those of you who haven't been and know your history of the state of Israel, you know that 50 years before October 7th, 2023, minus a day, another war took us by surprise, to be known as the Yom Kippur War. And without getting into too much detail, I will choose a starting point and point out that the post-1967 Six-Day War, in which Israel found itself on Olympus, we had prepared for a second Holocaust, anticipating being overrun by all of our countries, all the countries around us, and we turned and were able in 6 days to triple our landmass and to ensure that the Arab world would know they can't best us in war. And this set us on a particular path of a feeling of invincibility. So much so that we felt all we needed was a series of outposts along our Syrian border in the north and along our Egyptian border on the edge of the Sinai Desert and on the banks of the Suez Canal. And that was it. And lo and behold, on October 6th, Yom Kippur Day, 1973, whether our hubris or simply we thought we were stronger than the enemy, and maybe that's one and the same, and our enemy didn't have the wherewithal, let alone the strength, to attack us, they did. And they took us by surprise at 2 p.m. on that fateful holiday. Now, to make a very long story short, we won the war. This isn't going to be an elongated lesson on the Yom Kippur War. 3.5 weeks, we're able to push the Syrians back and we're able to push the Egyptians back. We even go into their territory, deciding to pull back to the previous borders because our goal was solely to ensure that we are not annihilated. And I know that we won the war because we weren't annihilated. There was no middle ground. It's not as if Egypt just wanted a slice of the Sinai or Syria just wanted the Golan Heights. And yet, we also lose the war. And how do I know we lose the war? Because we end up losing 2,700 soldiers and 3 times that are wounded at a time when 3.5 million was the populace of the state of Israel and not the just shy of 10 million that we are today. So that there wasn't a home in Israel that wasn't affected in some way. Something broke within us, our sense of self, our sense of strength, our sense of our own ability. And I think that this image of Golda on one of her helicopter hops throughout the country during and after the war is perhaps most telling of, well, if we were to use this term up until October 7th, 2023, any Israeli could tell you, especially of a particular age, that I'm referring to the Yom Kippur War when I used the Latinized version of conception in Hebrew, conceptia, as being the frame that shattered on that Yom Kippur War. That conceptia of how strong we were. Now, this is going to generate, in the aftermath of the war, a song which becomes perhaps one of the most, if not the most iconic relation with the war, Chaim Chefer's words in this song, The Last War. And we'll hear just a few bars sung by Yoram Gaon, who is no doubt the most iconically related voice to this song. And in fact, Yoram Gaon is the song of multiple generations of Israeli experience. So as you're reading through the lyrics in English, if you don't have Hebrew rolling off of your tongue, listen to the sound, but you can get a sense of what we were feeling in the aftermath of this Yom Kippur War.
אני זוכר בשם כל הטנקיסטים ופניהם המאובקות אשר עברו את כל האש והשחיקות בשם הימאים אשר פשטו על הנמלים ועיניהם כבדות ממלח וגלים אני מבטיח לך ילדה שלי קטנה שזאת תהיה המלחמה האחרונה אני מבטיח לך ילדה שלי קטנה שזאת תהיה
I promise you, my little girl, that this will be the last war. And truly, we felt that here in Israel. I was only 2 years old and I wasn't even yet living in Israel. But from what I understand, the hand of the pulse of society was such that if we were able to survive a war in which we were blindfolded of our own doing and with one hand tied behind our back of our own doing, then the Arab world will once and for all know that we have no other choice. We're not going anywhere. In fact, that was Golda's line, that Israel has a secret weapon. What's the secret weapon? We have nowhere else to go. And therefore, it would absolutely mean this had to be the last war. It was truly believed. So much so that in the aftermath, the 1970s saw Israel just trying to find its place in the world. And how do we know this? Well, in addition to having to ongoing battle with terrorism coming across our borders at the hands of the PLO from Lebanon, we are one. We won it in 1976. Israel wins a competition that should be banned because we should never objectify anybody in this way. But Israel wins the Miss Universe contest. In 1977, Israel is going to go ahead and win the European Basketball Cup. In the semifinals, we beat the Soviet Union. It's unbelievable. In 1978 and 79, back-to-back victories of the Eurovision competition. Now, most of the world knows Eurovision, Americans less so, unless you're a big fan of bell bottoms and sparkle. It's become, a few years back, actually Madonna sang at the Eurovision when it was here in Israel after we won a fifth time. So there's more knowledge of this, but Israel wins twice. It's unreal. Little Israel is indeed finding a seat at the table of the world. And if that wasn't enough, in 1976, Israel will also reach beyond its borders to save its own when it goes on this rescue mission to Uganda to save in the city of Entebbe 100 Israeli and Jewish hostages who weren't Israeli, who were being held by Palestinian and European terrorists. Unbelievable. And also in 1977, we have an election of a brand new government here, the Likud government, which was a right-wing, hawkish government, and yet in 1978 would begin a process that would lead to peace with our archenemy, Egypt. This is unreal. And then the 1980s open up, and 1982 has us smack dab in the middle of what would become 18 years stuck in the mud, figuratively and actually, in Lebanon. Now, it began because of the ongoing terrorism that was happening, that once and for all, Israel was going to deal with the PLO terrorists. However, once we oust them very soon on, we find that vacuum is filled quickly with a new terrorist organization called Hezbollah. And I'm not even dealing now yet what we're dealing with today, but that's its genesis. And then in 1984, so we have lows and we have great highs as we reach beyond our borders to help our own immigrate from Ethiopia in what will be called Operation Moses. Now, don't mistake what I just said in that it's not as if Israel reached out and saved the poor Ethiopian Jews. No, there was a partnership between both the modern state of Israel reaching out to take care of its own and a group of strong-minded Jews who had held on for 2,500 years of Jewish identity, longing to one day return to Jerusalem. This is amazing. And then we see 1987, and we have the beginning of what would be known as the first Intifada, the first uprising of Palestinians, which begins in Gaza at the helm, which stood a new terrorist organization, unlike the secular PLO Palestinian Sunni terrorist organization. This would be a religious Sunni Palestinian terrorist organization called Hamas. Ultimately, this First Intifada would come to an end in 1993, but I'm getting ahead of myself because in 1991, Israel is faced with two major events. One is going to be the first Gulf War, and as an attempt to rile the Arab world around Saddam Hussein, when America shifts Desert Shield to Desert Storm, if you remember, Saddam Hussein fires Scud rockets on Israel. This Gulf War, as it were, would come to an end, but would be the first major moment in which a country in which Israel doesn't have a border with fires rockets indiscriminately on it. In the aftermath of that war, there's a shifting of tectonic plates, and we begin to see another wave of immigration from Ethiopia called Operation Solomon. Again, this partnership between an age-old dream and the modern state of Israel. But what really is going to set in motion, hold on, the next step as we move forward to 2023 are going to be these 2 years, because 1993 and 1994 are going to produce, I mentioned tectonic shifting of the plates. Well, this was seismology par excellence, as we see on September 13th, 1993, the shaking of hands on the White House lawn between Yasser Arafat, the head of the PLO, the bona fide terrorist organization that started in 1964, 3 years before the Six-Day War, attacking Israel, is now going to be shaking hands with the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, whose thumbprint was on the victory of the Six-Day War, among many other heroic moments in which he solidified his acknowledgement, or others acknowledged him as a hero of the Jewish people. This was to set in motion a mutual recognition between the Palestinians and the state of Israel that if all of the yardstick moments were to be met within 5 or 6 years, there would be a Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel. And of course, this would not come to fruition because of the ongoing terrorism that ran alongside, and subsequently we found out was actually actively supported by Yasser Arafat. And of course, the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin on November 4th, 1995, at the hands of a Jewish terrorist, Yigal Amir, after a peace rally in Tel Aviv. Along the way in 1994, a much more welcomed and perhaps natural peace was signed between Yitzhak Rabin and King Hussein, sharing a smoke here in the White House. And of course, the real, honest to goodness smile seen on the faces of the Jordanian soldiers and the Israeli soldiers there in the Arava Desert in September of 1994, signing our second peace deal with an Arab country. This was the backdrop to this song that was written. Now, I'll just say a few words about the song before you read the lyrics and before we listen to the music, in that, one, this would be a song that was written specifically to be sung by one of our military entertainment troops. And two, when music is used in programs like this, oftentimes it's a few bars, maybe it's just one stanza, and then we move on. And in fact, what I'm going to do is run through the whole song. And the reason for that is not that it will take you that long to read the lyrics. And this we see on the screen right now, actually only half of the lyrics. And in fact, the screen that you see on the right, which we'll hear in just a moment, is the initial 4 Israeli soldiers who are singing this song for the first time in public on Israeli TV. In the middle of the song, we will see both the lyrics shift to the second half, and the screen's going to change to the 4 soldiers, not in 1994, but in 2011, singing to an audience of those folks who grew up with them, with the vision of a different future. And what I'd like you to do, once you've read the lyrics, is to not only listen to the sounds, but to look at the faces, both of these young soldiers, and what do you see? And then of those same soldiers now grown up and adults with children of their own, and those in the audience. And in fact, one of the folks in the audience, you'll see it 1 or 2 times, they camera focuses in on her, is the daughter of Yitzhak Rabin, Dalia. And you can imagine in her face holding all the what ifs that could have been. In the beginning, by the way, the first minute or so, you'll see that the soldier's speaking. The sound's a little low. Don't be concerned. I will either way place the translation there for you to see, because he's speaking in Hebrew. And then when they start to sing, it picks up in the volume.
כי באמת כל הזמן שאנחנו חיינו אז הבטיחו לנו שלום, והבטיחו לנו שיהיה טוב, ואנחנו רואים שזה מתגשם לנגד עינינו, וזה כיף גדול. באמת, אני אגיד את זה עוד פעם.
חורף 73.
כן.
בבקשה.
אנחנו הילדים של חורף, שנת 73. חלמתם אותנו לראשונה עם שחר, בתום הקרבות. הייתם גברים עייפים שהודו למזלם הטוב. הייתן נשים צעירות מודאגות, ורציתן כל כך לאהוב. וכשהריתם אותנו באהבה, בחורף 73, רציתם למלא בגופכם את מה שחיסרה המלחמה. כשנולדנו הייתה הארץ פצועה ועצובה. היבטתם בנו, חיבקתם אותנו, ניסיתם למצוא נחמה. כשנולדנו ברכו הזקנים בעיניים דומעות. אמרו הילדים האלה הלוואי לא ילכו אל הצבא.
לפניכם בתצלום הישן מוכיחות שדיברתם מכל הלב, שהבטחתם לעשות בשבילנו הכל, להפוך אויב לאוהב. הבטחתם יונה עלה של זית, הבטחתם שלום בבית, הבטחתם אביב ופריחות, הבטחתם לקיים הבטחות, הבטחתם יונה.
אנחנו הילדים של חורף, שנת 73. גדלנו אנחנו עכשיו בצבא עם הנשק, קסדה על הראש. גם אנחנו יודעים לעשות אהבה, צוחקים ויודעים לבכות.
גם אנחנו גברים, גם אנחנו נשים, גם אנחנו חולמים תינוקות. ולכן לא נלחץ, ולכן לא נדרוש, ולכן לא נאיים. כשהיינו קטנים אמרתם הבטחות צריך לקיים. אם דרוש לכם כוח ניתן, לא נחסוך, רק רצינו ללחוש. אנחנו הילדים של החורף ההוא, שנת 70.
That's Dahlia Rabin.
הבטחתם יונה עלה של זית, הבטחתם שלום בבית, הבטחתם אביב
Now, one of the reasons that you might have seen some solemn faces on the faces of the audience, in the audience, was because of the fact that in the aftermath of this great imagination of a different future with all of the challenges, which, by the way, I don't think it was a song that presented some kind of a blindfolded vision of an imaginary piece. There's a real challenge there. The younger generation challenging the older generation. Mom and Dad, you promised us peace, and you taught us not to lie. You promised us a dove, and what gives? Now we're soldiers with helmets and guns? Come on. So the accusatory tone, however, shifts gears when they say, you did your best. We got this now. It's our turn, but know this. We don't want to be here. We'd rather be having babies and love and making love and thinking of different things. Now, I can tell you that when this was written and sung for the first time, I was freshly out of my own military service, and it absolutely spoke to what I was feeling and my friends were feeling at the time. And I can tell you, as a father of daughters who went into the army. My oldest is now 24, but when she went in and then my second daughter went in, I can promise you that they too chose the path they did in the combat units in which they served, knowing that they were going to do what they needed to do, but they would rather be somewhere else. But this vision seemed to shatter, not just with the assassination of Rabin in 95, but in 2000, we go ahead and see the beginning of what will be called the Second Intifada, which was a much more painful, both for Palestinians and Israelis, Intifada uprising than the first one. And this would go between 2000 and 2005, 2006, with bus bombings, and it was a difficult and painful time. And some of you might have been in Israel during that period of time or had friends and families here. It wasn't easy. In 2005, Israel pulls out of the Gaza Strip. Ariel Sharon, the prime minister, hawk of hawks, surprises his own constituents and those who voted against him or voted against his party, and remove 7,500 Israelis from 23 settlements in the Gaza Strip to be handed over to the Palestinians and to be run by the PA, the Palestinian Authority, which was the government, as it were, in Ramallah, and the same government that was created in the aftermath of those same Oslo Accords. In 2006, there were elections in Gaza, which produced a victory to Hamas over the Palestinian Authority. Now, painfully, within the Gaza Strip, you're going to see that winning the election wasn't enough for Hamas as they purge any remnant of the Palestinian Authority. And that's not hyperbole. I'm talking about public executions, throwing people from rooftops, dragging them through the streets. It was painful to watch and, of course, to go through. There's no love lost between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority at that time. This would also produce a government that would be ruling until today and generated already from 2001 the ongoing rockets that we've been seeing, etc. And I'm not even yet speaking of what we've been going through the last 14 months. But we have one more stepping stone, and that's 2015 before we get to 2023. And in this particular scene, which we're only going to hear a bit of the song, it's actually the same song we just heard. However, the difference is there was a reality show at the time called Bet Sefer LeMuzika, which was a wholesome, family-oriented, feel-good, warm, fuzzy kind of TV show in which kids had mentors and they sang their songs. In this particular show, one of the mentors and judges was, in fact, the same Yoram Gaon, who was the one who we heard sing the first song, The Last War. But in this scenario, these three kids are pitted together to sing, We Are the Children of the Winter of 73. And you will not see the lyrics on the screen because I just want us to hear the words, and you already saw the lyrics. there's two young Jewish Israeli kids from Jerusalem and one young Arab girl from Israeli Arab girl from the city of Ramle, who are singing this song with those lyrics together. As we hear the little bit that I've clipped together here, a few things to notice. One is, once again, the faces in the audience, the parents and the families of these children, and the judges, of course. And at the very end, there's a bit of a twist that they add to the lyrics, actually change the lyrics. And when that comes on, you'll see a translation on the screen. Again, just part of the song.
אנחנו הילדים של חורף, שנת 73. חלמתם אותנו לראשונה עם שחר, בתום הקרבות. הייתם גברים עייפים שהודו למזל המתוק. הייתם נשים צעירות מודאגות ורציתם כל כך לאהוב, וכשהריתם אותנו באהבה בחורף 73 רציתם למלא בגופכם את מה שחיסרה המלחמה. כשנולדנו בירכו הזקנים בעיניים דומעות, אמרו הילדים האלה הלוואי ילכו אל הצבא, ופניכם בתצלום הישן מוכיחות שדיברתם מכל הלב, שהבטחתם לעשות בשבילנו הכל, להפוך אויב לאוהב. אם דרוש לכם כוח ניתן, לא נחסוך, רק רצינו ללחוש. אנחנו הילדים של החורף ההוא, שנת 2003.
You can see there that the change in the lyrics went from the children of the winter of 73 to the children of the winter of 2003. These are kids who grew up in that reality of the Second Intifada, and it doesn't take any explanation to describe what you saw towards the end there on the faces of the adults who were in the room and the image of what could have been and maybe would be. 2023 was a watershed moment in the annals of the history of the Jewish people. No more and no less. And this, of course, is going to continue into 2024, and painfully, we will see it in just a minute turn into 2025 as well, in what has become and continues to become the longest war in the history of the state of Israel. I am sure that you remember where you were on Simchat Torah on October 7th, 2023. Here in Israel was 6:30 a.m. in the morning, 6:29. You may have even been in shul in the synagogue in Bethel when you heard, and maybe even when you saw this image. And when this fence came down, and actually this fence, this breach point, when Hamas came across our border that morning, was one of 60 breach points in the 59-kilometer barrier that surrounds the Gaza Strip and separates it from Israel. So much more than that fence came tumbling down on that morning. It seems as if the response to the collapse of our sense of self on October 6, 1973, has a shelf life of 50 years plus a day. because what collapsed on this day was our sense of self, our sense of strength, and how weak we thought our enemy was. In fact, we had our eye on the ball, just the wrong ball, and we collapsed on this day in more ways than one. Now, one of the reasons that we heard that song in different variations was to ingrain within us the melody and, of course, the historic connotation of its own evolution. And the reason is because about a month after the war began, there were 3 teachers who, up until October 7th, in the off-season, that is in between semesters of teaching high school, they were part of a trio, a comedy trio, of 3 teachers, doing the circuit, working the circuit of different educators and Israelis who wanted to laugh at the school system here. A month after, they wrote new lyrics to the same song. And they called it, "We Are the Teachers of the Soldiers of the Winter of 23, dedicating it to 3 of their students who died on that day. You'll see that in this case, there are subtitles. And along the way, there's some newspaper headings, and I've translated them. But when the pop-ups come up of the newspaper headings, they're not up for a very long time. If you miss it, it's not the end of the world.
אנחנו המורים של חיילי אוקטובר, שנת 23. נפרדנו מכם רק לא מזמן בטקס וספר מחזור. היינו איתכם מתקופת הילדות ועד לבגרויות. חלפו השנים, לא הצלחנו תמיד לראות מה גדלתם להיות. וכשהגיעה אותה השבת באוקטובר 23, יצאתם להגן בגופכם על כל תושבי המדינה. יצאתם מיד, גם בלי צו 8, יצאתם בעוז, באומץ, יצאתם בלי שום שאלות, לא חשבתם לבקש הקלות, יצאתם מיד. אתם חיילות וחיילי אוקטובר, שנת 23. גדלתם במדינה שסועה ופולגת, בלי עוגן, בלי ראש. אך אתם לא הבדלתם בין קודש לחול, לא עניין אתכם שמאל או ימין. כשלמעלה חיפשו להפיל אחריות, כבר הייתם בקו הקדמי. ולכן נעמוד ונצדיע לכם, בצניעות נתייצב לצדכם. את הבוסר אנחנו אכלנו, ואתם משלמים בדמכם. ואנחנו לנצח מורים שלכם, נזדקף ונרים את הראש. תודה על השיעור שלמדנו מכם באוקטובר 23. יצאתם מיד, גם בלי צו 8 יצאתם בעוז, באומץ יצאתם בלי שום שאלות, לא חשבתם לבקש הקלות. נכון אין יונה, עלה של זית, אך אתם הדוגמה לשלום בית. קיבלנו שיעור אזרחות, למדנו בזכותכם מה זאת בגרות, יצאתם מיד.
You can see that the song was written, as I mentioned, in memory of these three young students of theirs. And I'll just add one last thing, is that this particular war, among many other things, has produced a new emotion here in Israel, one that combines rage and love. And in fact, I don't know if you can see me in the little window there, but the same arms that were clenched in fists of rage and anger at where was the army on October 7th are the same arms that extend to embrace every single soldier that we see. Because there's no separation between the army and us. And it could very well be that Israel is of the most unique countries in the world where this is true, that there's no separation. In fact, it's one organism. And that there's a realization in Israel that often we tell people, oh, you young people, you stand on the shoulders of giants. When in fact, there is a true internalization, and you could have heard it in the voice of these teachers, that it's us that stand on the shoulders of giants. Sorry. When we look at our younger generation and we realize that this is, in fact, the generation that will be our salvation. I will say that while we can see the names on the screen, I think it's important that we take a moment and recognize that you don't need me to tell you this, that every life lived and life lost is a world unto themselves. And while this is not even anything other than just a few lines, is that we take a few moments. And you'll see probably too much verbiage on the screen that should be on any PowerPoint. And in fact, I'll be quiet in just a moment so you can read for yourselves a little bit about who these young people were. Even if you don't finish reading everything you see on the screen, we have a moment to have a small window into what was going through the minds of these teachers as these young people were on their minds when they wrote those lyrics. One of the ground zeros of this war was undoubtedly a party that was taking place about 5 kilometers from the Gaza Strip, between Kibbutz Be'eri and Kibbutz Re'im, at a campsite called the Re'im campsite. This was a party called the Supernova Party. In fact, there was about 3,000 to 3,500 party goers who bought tickets, and everything was organized, and there were organizers, and there were medics, and there was different water stands, and there was camping ground, and everything was above ground. And it was a community. They actually called themselves a tribe. It was a tribe of like-minded music lovers of a particular genre of music. oftentimes called electronic music or trance. We might understand the concept as we call it a rave. And while we might have certain stigmas of the kind of people that go to these things, and perhaps we don't necessarily see this kind of music as our cup of tea, the truth is that this particular crowd embodied within it everything that's good about Israeli society. It was a party about celebrating love and freedom and peace and coming together, and all wakes of Israeli society, all faiths within Israeli society, all ethnicities within Israeli society, all political spectrum within Israeli society. And the truth is that the kind of person who went here was no difference in essence than those that went to Woodstock back in the day, and every music festival between then and now. Now, when the party began, just to give you a sense of where we're talking about here, you can see on the right the distance between the Gaza Strip and where the party took place. Also, just north of the party was where Kibbutz Be'eri is, and just south is where Kibbutz Re'im is. You can see my cursor circling it there. And if we look on the left image, zoomed in a bit, this was where the festival area is, and this road over here has become infamously known as Route 232. You can see the different stage areas where the camping grounds were. Again, Gaza was over this way. Hopefully you can see the cursor. Now, at 6:29, which by the way, sunrise at these kind of raves, which was supposed to run for 24 hours, is the peak of the party. As people start to really get very the excitement is riled up, and the party's going on. And shortly after sunrise, we begin to see the first puffs of smoke there, which in fact were the first intercepts by our Iron Dome missile intercept of the rockets that were being fired over into Israel, and in fact were the first of 4,800 rockets that would be fired at Israel that day. Now, immediately, the organizers shut the party down and told people to find a safe space and also to evacuate as quickly as possible. And while there were still rockets in the air and intercepts, while it seemed a bit much and more than we're used to, it's the kind of thing that we understand. What changed, survivors testify, when they heard the gunfire. And as they hear that, they begin running, rightfully so, away from Gaza towards the fields that are just east of the road of 232, and they're also running north and south. Unfortunately, what had happened was it was so congested, and also the Hamas terrorists had blocked off the roads. I mentioned 60 breach points in the fence. They had already created killing zones at each of the intersections, and also had reached the towns that were 22 kilometers away, like Ofakim and Netivot, and therefore had closed in those party goers, and literally there was nowhere to run. In the aftermath of the atrocities, it became clear that of the 3,500 party goers, 364 were murdered. And let's just be clear. I'm using the word murdered as a word that describes what we understand that to mean. And you'll excuse me for, at the moment, not going into detail of what I mean when I say murdered in the context of what took place at Nova. Not because I'm shying away from atrocities, because I'm not, and I'm not of those who believe, oh, we should look away because it's so horrible. How can we watch this or hear this? Because if people went through it, who are we to decide not to see it? But we're adults, and you can find this online, but you know of the mutilation and the murder and the rape and the kidnapping that took place, and the torture that took place. In fact, 44 were kidnapped from this party. And the truth is that there were 413 who were murdered in this area because there were two other smaller parties taking place not far from here. Either way, what we see here are soldiers walking through the remains of the campground and, of course, some of the vehicles. This, by the way, This van was actually an ambulance in which 18 of the partygoers thought to find refuge when Hamas terrorists fired an RPG shoulder-held anti-tank rocket at it. And of course, the outcome is clear. The next song we're going to hear is called We Are the Children of 23. And once again, you will recognize the melody. It's the same one from before. However, this time, about 6 months after the war began, it would be the family members, and in particular the parents of those who were murdered at Nova and kidnapped at Nova, who wrote these lyrics. And just as once again, an open and honest full disclaimer, if the previous song we heard was sad and painful, no doubt, but there was also a feeling and a sense of real pride and awe, this song, if you ask me, is just sad. The actors in the clip, by the way, are all either survivors of or family members of those who were murdered at the Nova party, and the clip is taken at the Nova site.
אנחנו הילדים של חורף, שנת 23. שמעתם אותנו לאחרונה עם שחר, תחילת הקרבות. היינו גברים צעירים שרצו לעשות רק טוב. היינו נשים חכמות ושמחות, רצינו כל כך לאהוב.
כשחיפשתם אותנו בתקווה בתפילה, בבוקר אותה שבת, גיליתם זוועות, נחתם הסוף, עצרה נשימה. כשנרצחנו על גב הארץ, פצועה בעמומה, דמיינו אתכם, דיברנו איתכם, נפרדנו, ואין נחמה. כל מה שרצינו זה רק ליהנות, לרקוד. ניסינו לברוח, פחדנו, נמרחנו, בלי חירות. חיוכים בתצלום, אתרים מוכיחים שחלמנו עתיד וחיים, ועכשיו אנחנו למעלבים, למטה שוכבים בקברים. הובטח ביטחון על לשם זין, הבטיחו שלום, בבית הבטיחו אביב, ופריחות הבטיחו לקיים, הבטחות, הובטח ביטחון. אנחנו המשפחות של חורף, שנת 23. נשארנו לבד בלי כוח, לא יודעים איך לחיות. כבר לא תעשו אהבה, כבר לא תצחקו, לא תביאו ילדים לעולם, כבר לא תרקדו במסיבות. ולכן כן נלחץ, ולכן כן נדרוש, ולכן כן נילחם. כשהלכתם לרקוד הם הבטיחו הבטחות, צריך לקיים. לעולם עוד ניחם, לא נשכח, לא נסלח, והכל זה בשבילכם. אנחנו משפחת השכול מסירות, שנת 23. הובטח ביטחון, עלה של זין, הבטיחו שלום. בבית הבטיחו ערבים, ופריחות הבטיחו לקיים. הבטחות, הובטח ביטחון, עלה של זין, הבטיחו שלום. בבית הבטיחו ערבים, ופריחות הבטיחו לקיים. הבטחות, הובטח ביטחון.
אנחנו הילדים של חורף, שנת 23.
As I mentioned, it was the parents who wrote this song, and in fact, the parents that and the family members that spearheaded this song are the ones that you see on the screen right now. And as we did before, I think it behooves us to take a moment, even if it means a little bit of silence in this Zoom and a lot of writing on the screen there, for us to take a moment and to read a single snapshot of who was in the minds of these parents and siblings when they wrote the words of that song. And of course, you, like I, heard the pain and sadness in those words and anger. Who were they thinking of when they wrote those words? You may not be able to read everything that's on the screen, but again, we walk away with a snapshot of who these young people were. Very early on, after the attacks began, Shani calls her parents. They live in the town of Yokneam, which is just near Haifa, actually on the backside of the Carmel Mountain. And as soon as at 7 o'clock that call goes through, the father gets into the car and drives all the way down south towards where the party is going to save his daughter. He arrives there, sadly, without knowing it, just minutes too late, as Shani was one of the 18 who ran into that very ambulance that we saw earlier. And while he was looking for her, actually, he arrives and the ambulance was still burning. He didn't know that she was inside. He stayed there for 5 days looking for his daughter, saving those who could be saved along the way and being able to recover 247, as you can see on the screen, bodies that later were able to be buried. But again, this is that reality. It's not just the life that was lost when it was lost, but of course the life that was lived and who these people were. As we know, everyone is a world unto themselves. Now, for those of you who've been to Israel, and you'd have to remind me, those of us who were together, whether or not, I don't remember if we did this or not, but there's a street art tour you can do in South Tel Aviv. And you see in the neighborhood of Florentine and other neighborhoods that are in South Tel Aviv, what you find in lots of gentrifying neighborhoods that are going through a process, and that's street art. And often street art is an attempt by those of that space to talk to others who come in and out of that space of what they're feeling. In this case, it's Israelis talking to Israelis. And you are brought into this to see what is the conversation about, whether it's about religion or society or the environment or politics or whatever. And the aftermath of October 7th, it was no different. And what you're going to see now on the screen are of several images that I took shortly after the beginning of the war. And if you remember in the beginning, while we have 100 hostages who are still in captivity, at the time, 251 were stolen from the party, from their homes, from their beds, from their fields, from their bases. And were added on to 4 Israelis who are still already in captivity for the last 10 years in Gaza. But at the time, there were also many children. And you can see the image on the left over there, exemplifying the horror that we can't even fathom. Speaking of which, if we look on the right here and you see the image of Superman, this, by the way, was probably the first big mural that went up after October 7th. And honestly, I don't know what the artist intended. Who is the don't panic? Is Superman supposed to be the IDF, which is coming to save us? Is Superman the resilience and the essence of what it means to be an Israeli as we perceive ourselves? Clearly, we're being told don't panic. You can see what's happening to Superman. And if you look to the bottom right, you can see the IDF protects us with a drop there. But things were not as they should have been. That is clear. And what was supposed to protect us clearly didn't. I am sure, in fact, I know for a fact that your congregation includes within it communities that, in fact, maybe don't have the praying community as the centerpiece of why they belong to Bethel. And in fact, they're there because of the social cohesiveness, because of the community building, and because of the, well, tikkun olam that happens within your community. And that there are folks within your community. In fact, as a synagogue at large, you speak for those who don't have a voice. And I'm sure there are many protests that you found yourselves in as allies of those groups who don't have the strength they need. And I'm sure you, like me, were very aware of the blaring silence that we needed when we looked for allies. And Me Too, unless you're a Jew, exemplified that real pain when there were no voices that spoke out for what happened to those who endured the sexual and the physical abuse on October 7th and continue till this day. Free Pink. Pink is actually the street name of And Rabbi, can you tell me, can you see the image I'm holding up? I'm holding up a poster. Inbar Hyman was a 27-year-old woman, a young woman, who originally from Petach Tikva, but was living in Haifa. She was a student of visual communications and was in her fourth year and actually was at the party, at the Nova party. She was there as a volunteer, offering emotional assistance to those who needed at the party, which was a position that you found at these kinds of parties. Her street name, by the way, she was a street artist as well, was Pink. When the attack began, she she ran actually and tried to save herself. And in fact, all the way from 6:30 in the morning to 1 p.m., she managed, along with two other friends, to stay ahead of the terrorists, and they eventually caught up with her. And they captured her and they kidnapped her. And it was believed that she, in fact, was still alive. But on December 16th, the army had enough information to identify that she, in fact, had been murdered, and her body is being held captive in Gaza. Throughout Israel, and in particular in Tel Aviv, you could see these large graffiti street art pieces, Free Pink. On the left, you can see the image there. And in Israel, when we write the date, we do the day first and then the month. So it says October 7th or 7th of October, you can see there. And then there's a Magen David, a Jewish star. And just below it, it says Am Yisrael. It's missing a word. And it could very well be that in this particular intent, was it something was lost so much that, in fact, we're asking ourselves, are we in fact still alive? In the middle, you see in the block print letters, Bibi Habaita, Bibi go home. And on the right there, it says in the sticker, Am Chazak, strong people, Hanhaga Chalasha, weak leadership. Now, some of you may in fact know this already, but Tel Aviv is a bastion of secular Jewish Israeli identity, which in itself could almost be an oxymoron. We would think, wait, Judaism, Jewishness is a religion. How can it also be secular? And of course, those who know that Tel Aviv was born out of the ideology of the second Aliyah, that second wave of immigration that came at the beginning of the 20th century that said, Mom, Dad, love you very much. You're wrong. We're right. We know how to save the Jewish people. And in fact, don't need a rabbi, don't need a synagogue. We will save the Jewish people by tapping in to a more ancient Jewish life in which we worked the land of Israel ourselves and defended the land of Israel ourselves and spoke Hebrew as a vernacular. And that identity would evolve into this new concoction known as secular Jewish Israeli identity in Tel Aviv. Interesting enough that our street artist here on the right, in the stenciled letters in red and in blue, taps in to our biblical narrative. Clearly a very religious piece of writing. And on the top in the red it says, Ve'aretz hayta tohu vavohu, in the first two lines, which is translated to, we find in the second verse of the book of Genesis chapter 1, and the land was empty and void and full of chaos. And and the next line in the Bible is I'm translating just off the top of my head, there was a great emptiness in the expanse. And here, the artist added, Va'aretz hayta tohu vavohu ve'gam ani, and so was I. And if you look down below in the blue, also taken from our biblical narrative, the book of Psalms, chapter 23. Gam im telech begeitz al mavet lo tira ra. In the first three lines, it says, even if you walk in the valley of the shadow of death, you shall know no harm. As the original goes on to say, ki ata imadi, because you are with me. And here, the poetic license led the artist to write, ki ata am madhim, because you are a great people, an amazing people. And in fact, I'm coming back now to that same evolution of new emotions. We find ourselves here in Israel with so much anger at our leadership, at our government. In fact, it is absolutely okay to be critical of the state of Israel. Just get in line behind Israelis because we do it better than anyone else. All you have to do is look to the fact that for 2 years, this January will be 2 years, that every single Saturday night, hundreds of thousands of Israelis take to the streets to pray with our feet, to demand change. And for the first 9 months of the 23 was against the judicial revolution. And of course, since October 7th was to be there for those families who had lost everything as they wait for some answer from their hostage relatives. Not to mention those who are demanding that our government do better. So on the one hand, we're at great anger, and yet what you see within Israeli society on October 7th is Israeli society turning on a dime, putting everything else aside, and running into the fray. Those of us who could put on uniform did, and those of us who couldn't went ahead and did whatever civil society needed to save us. Again, a new emotion has been created. If you look at the centerpiece here, we have a mural depicting a young woman, 26-year-old, Inbal Lieberman, who who was a young woman from Kibbutz Nir Am, who had been a combat soldier in her military days, and a year before had been chosen to be the commander of the civil security response team of the kibbutz. And when the siren sounded on October 7th, and of course she, like everyone else, heard them, and the plan was to run to the safe room, she also realized that there's something else beyond just this going on. And she quickly organized her response team, security team, distributed the weapons, and began organizing them where to position themselves around the kibbutz, creating ambushes for any terrorists trying to breach the kibbutz. And when the electricity went down on the kibbutz and the main electronic door of the gate, or the gate of the kibbutz, was closed, she gave the order not to work the generator to recreate the electricity, because she knew she had to keep the gate closed for whatever might happen. She, along with the Golani soldiers and tank soldiers who later came, were able to save their kibbutz. Truly a hero. On the right, you can see a man and a child. And earlier in the presentation, we heard our military entertainment troupe sing that original song. Israel also, as part of an army position, has a military artist. There's only a handful of those, and lucky if you get it. But this young woman was a woman named Rotem Zamir, who October 7th went ahead and painted this mural in South Tel Aviv. You can see the date on top. You can see the Iron Dome interceptors on the right. And in the middle, I don't know who these people are. Is this a father coming home from reserve duty to his daughter? Is this a soldier who had recovered one of the children who had been kidnapped? I don't know. What I can imagine is that in Rotem Zamir's mind, this is an image of how Israelis see themselves, and perhaps why we're doing what we're doing. This is our goal. On the right, you can see our real Wonder Woman. And of course, not Gal Gadot, but Rachel Edry, or Rachel, as we knowingly and lovingly call her. This is a woman from the city of Ofakim, which is about 22 kilometers from Gaza. And Rachel and her husband David were in their apartment, and terrorists who overtook the city came to their apartment, 5 of them, and took them hostage for 20 hours. During that time, Rachel essentially killed them with kindness, utilizing the tools at her fingertips, which was she had some Arabic from home, and also asking them how they're feeling, asking if they were hungry, bringing them cookies, bringing them drink, bringing them food, and the whole time giving information somehow to the police outside who were planning to breach the apartment and save them. One of the officers, by the way, was one of her sons planning to come in, and she was able to give them information. Where are the terrorists? How many are they? Which eventually, after 19, 20 hours, they do. They kill the terrorists and they save Rachel and David, which, let me be clear, they saved them because Rachel was able to save themselves as well. Very sadly, a few months later, David would pass away. On the left, you can see somewhat of a interesting mural there of these three young women soldiers with mustaches. These are representative of those tatzpitaniot, or the overseers, and you might have heard of those from the Nachal Oz base, which was one of the bases that were overrun by terrorists. During the battle for Nachal Oz, 54 soldiers died, including many Golani combat soldiers and other intelligence soldiers. There were 16 tatzpitaniot who were murdered on that day, 7 of whom were kidnapped. And of the 7 who were kidnapped, 1 was murdered, and her body was recovered by Israel. And another was rescued while she was still alive shortly after October 7th. But as you remember, there are 5 women who are still being held. And just as a reminder, here are some of them. One is Romi Gonen, you can see in the image. Hopefully you see what I'm holding up. And Liri Albag, and Karina Arayev. And there's also Agam Berger and Naama Levi. Now, why the mustache? Because these women, who were of the most professional soldiers we had, who were the eyes of the country, who gave their reports and gave their warnings, were ignored by higher echelons of, and I'll use this loosely, old school officers who felt that they knew more than these underlings. And the 3 women are pointing to what it says on the wall there. The writing was on the wall. On the top left, you can see 4 images of young people. The first one is Ben Shimoni, who was 31 years old, who was at the party with 2 friends after spending Shabbat dinner and the holiday dinner the night before with his girlfriend and his family in the city of Ashkelon. The girlfriend decided not to go, and he went to the party. Shortly after the rockets began, he was able to find his car, get into his car, and because he knew the back roads and in fact liked doing extreme sports, knew how to get out of there, picked up 4 people he didn't know along the way and brought them to safety to the edge of Beersheba. While they pleaded with him not to go back, he said, there's so many other people there, and I have 2 friends I came with, I'm going back for them. He goes back, does not find them, goes into the fray, picks up 8 other people, and brings them to safety. And he goes to the city of Netivot. He then goes back in a 3rd time after his girlfriend and his family asked him, don't go back, you've done enough. And he said, I can't leave them there. And he goes in, and ultimately, he's able to get more people, by the way, including Romi Gonen, who we just saw. And on Route 232, there would be an ambush, and he would be killed. Romi and another would be injured and kidnapped to Gaza. Next to him is Awad Dawalshe, a young Israeli, an Arab Muslim Israeli, who was a paramedic and in fact had started studying medicine as well. And he was working as a paramedic at the festival, because I said they had they had the medical stations and everything they needed for this party. And he, in fact, could have saved himself, but he decided to stay and to continue to treat those who were injured until he himself was murdered. Next to him is a young man by the name of Aner Shapira. Aner Shapira was a combat soldier who actually was on leave. A young guy who was in the Nachal Brigade, who was at the party, and when the firing started, ran towards Kibbutz Re'im, just south of the party, and went into one of the miguniyot, one of the bomb shelters above ground. You might have seen these that are at various intersections there in the south, because you only have 10 seconds to get to a bomb shelter when the rockets start falling. And Aner, along with 2.5 others, gathered in this very small migunit, safe space. And he, in fact, told those inside, and survivors testified to this, and actually took a picture of him in midstream, that he said, this is what's going to happen next. The terrorists are going to come here, and they're going to begin to lob grenades into the migunit. Everyone lie down, protect yourselves best you can. I will stand in the door and try and deflect the grenades as they're thrown in. Then the terrorists pull up to the migunit, knowing how many were inside, and the dash cams and the GoPros that they were wearing because they wanted to record and project it all, showed us exactly what happened as the terrorists went over and started lobbing grenades in. 7 times Aner was able to catch the grenades and throw them out again. One time actually directing it towards the terrorists, taking the offensive. The 8th time, however, painfully, he was not able to. He was murdered, and many inside were murdered by the grenades and the fire afterwards that were shot inside. There were a few who survived and were not taken. 4 were injured and captured. Amongst them, Aner's very close friend who he grew up with in Jerusalem, Hirsch Goldberg Polin. And of course, we remember the painful end. Free Hirsch. Hirsch was only freed after he was murdered, executed, when his funeral then took place in Jerusalem on September 2nd. We're almost rounding out here to the end, but I wanted to point out at the top of the image on the right, you can see that the poet has gone ahead and once again tapped into our biblical narrative, choosing the book of Samuel 2, chapter 1, verse 25. And this is what is very well known within the biblical text as the lament of King David. And this lament is one that he writes in memory of his dear friend Jonathan and, of course, King Saul, who would be murdered by the Philistines. And it's become so prominently known that it's often found in eulogies at military funerals. Ech naflu giborim, how the mighty have fallen, the verse says in the Bible. And then the artist goes ahead and adds, and naflu giborim, and the mighty have fallen, and also the not mighty have fallen, grandmothers and children, and this whole country falls and gets up and gets up. V'kama efshar, and how much can we go through this again and again, having to bandage our wounds and wear helmets of war again? As you know, of the 100 who are still in captivity, there are still 2 children, Kfir and Ariel Bibas. Their parents, Shiri and Yarden Bibas. I have no words. On the right, you can see the image there by the bike rack, and you might be able to make out the block letters there. It says Chazakim Biyachad, which means we are stronger together, which is interesting because I would say that it's probably one of 2 main slogans that are out there on graffiti, on statements that are made. The other one being Beyachad ninatseach. Together we will win. Now, I chose this image and not the other one because honestly, I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means to win. In fact, I don't think there is a win here. Now, that's not a fatalist point of view coming from me. It's not as if I think we're all going to die. In fact, even though you're probably, those of you who know Israelis know that up until October 7th, no matter what the conversation, at some point, an Israeli would say, Yeh beseder, it'll be okay. Since October 7th, we're not hearing that. Not because we think we're not going to be okay. We know we will be okay because there is no middle ground. We have no other choice. We just don't see a clear path yet. However, this idea of winning, no, we lost. That doesn't mean that we won't stand again and thrive again. And if anything, the one thing we do recognize from October 7th is our resilience. And that is what's going to get us through this. But chazakim biyachad, that is true. We are stronger together. And it is interesting, just as an aside, that, and I don't know if there's any street artists amongst us here in our Zoom, but this idea of being a street artist is a solo act. Oftentimes, it is accompanied with this look. Spray. And we're looking out for the cops. And yet here, the street artist has brought us together. Just like dancing the hora was once our national dance. And we jump ahead and now we see a rave where we're all individually jumping up and down. And yet even at that rave, what do they call themselves? A tribe. Conceptually, it's that idea of coming together, even if you're a solo act. Now, if we want to go ahead and look for hope, and I'd say we're probably about 5 minutes towards the end of our presentation, I want to share 2 poems that were written in Israel post-October 7th and 2 poems that were written in the United States post-October 7th. And the reason is because while I don't belittle by any stretch of the imagination what we have faced here in Israel since October 7th, I know that the Jewish people at large, and in particular in the United States, they face another front line. And that we are all going through this, albeit maybe slightly differently, but we are all going through this together. Cleared for publication. This is a term that Israelis cringe when they hear the words on the news, hutar lepirsum. Some of you might know Professor Rachel Korazim, who is an incredible professor of Holocaust history and curriculum writing, as well as Israeli literature. And she collected 59 poems that were written here in Israel since October 7th and collected them into a book that was recently published, both in Hebrew and English, which is where this piece is from. And this idea of cleared for publication is what we hear, and we have a collective stolen breath when we do, because we know that the next words out of the newscaster's mouth will be the name of a fallen soldier. And God forbid we should know that name. And even if we don't know the name, we know that somewhere in the country there are those for whom their lives have been destroyed forever. When you return, we'll sit just the 2 of us in the shower. You in the gentle water, I facing you. We'll gently wash your hair, erase your memories. We'll sing to you the song of the hyacinths and of the rain tickling the window. By the way, that's a reference to a children's poem that's read to children here. I will carefully clean between your toes every speck from the tunnels. I will tell you about the moon that shone so many nights when you weren't here. I will wipe the tears off your face. The gentle water will wash them away. I will braid your hair, dress you in pajamas, just the 2 of us in bed, and a caring hug and hope and love and fear and prayer that there will never be a next time. Are these the words of the mother of Liri Albag or Romi Gonen? I don't know. But clearly, Avital Nadler is able to allow us a window into what that might sound like. Some of you might know Rabbi Chana Yerushalmi, who, even though she has an Israeli name, is an American, very much connected to Israel, of course, and among many other things, in the aftermath of October 7th, began writing poetry to the point where, and I can tell you as an Israeli, it's not even that she had a hand on the pulse of where Israelis were at, but in fact, she seemed at times to be able to be the pulse itself. She too, by the way, has collected enough of her poetry, which, by the way, she has put everything on social media. But she also collected 2 volumes. She has published 2 volumes of work. These are excerpts from those. Now, you can read both of them for sure, but I'm going to share with you my favorite. And the reason it's my favorite is because, well, let me read it to you and then I'll share. Saving Universes. As Shabbat began, the ministering angel called out to man on his way home. Shabbat Shalom, how are you? The man looked surprised. Shabbat Shalom, today I'm proud, but also I feel so much despair. Tell me more, the angel said. The man's rich voice boasted, today I am proud because my daughter is a soldier and she is one of many who operate the Iron Dome, saving us from so much death and destruction. Then his voice became low. Today I also despair because despite my best efforts to teach her peace, she has seen nation lift up sword against nation. And sadly, she has also learned war. My friend, you are missing something, the angel pointed out. What can it be? The man said. There's no going back once you learn the lessons of war. Ah, the angel taught him. Just think about it. Every time she saves a single life, it is as if she has saved the entire universe. Imagine how many universes she has saved. Isn't that the greatest teaching of all? I have to say, as a parent, my most defining moment was helping my daughters figure out what they wanted to do in the Army. Each one on their own decided they wanted to choose a combat unit. Each one on their own chose the Iron Dome unit. I found myself swinging on this giant pendulum of immense concern and pride, knowing that I shouldn't be too concerned because I can do nothing about it, and it's definitely not about me, so put pride to bed. And yet, again, we come at that joining of different emotions. My oldest daughter, Meitav, spent 220 days in reserves down south with her unit since October 7th, and her sister spent the entirety of the war in her regular service up north, very, very busy. And my final song that I'm going to share with you before we say goodnight is a song that was written post-October 7th by Omri Glickman, the lead singer of a band called Hatikva Shesh, in which he writes about a nation of superheroes, elevating the reserve duty soldier, and that every one of us here in Israel has a cape in our closet in the form of a uniform, whether we are the assistant bank manager or the bus driver or the teacher or the doctor. Then he goes ahead and rewrites his own song. And he rewrites his own song and dedicates it to the members of Kibbutz Be'eri. Now, while it is specific to Kibbutz Be'eri, the reason I'm sharing it with you, in order to close out our window into Israeli society, is because I think in many ways the lyrics of this song speak very much to the fact this is how Israelis see ourselves.
אז הדרפס שלנו מגולני, אז הדרפס שלנו מגולני, הכובסת היא משדרות, השכן שלנו בקומה מלמעלה כבר חודש מזיז כיסאות, מנהל הקהילה הגבוה עושה משמרות בחמל, קשת ריכזה את כל התרומות ועכשיו היא חוקרת חלל. גילי מזכיר הקיבוץ הקשוח מבלה עם כולם במלון. לאט לאט השתלטנו פה ופתחנו גם את הקניון. והאבידה שלנו כפרה שלרוב מגדל וחיטה. הוא לוחם אמיתי מתאושש בגבורה, איך אתה מעורר השראה כאן. נכון כולם נראים רגילים אבל זה קיבוץ של גיבורי על. בכל אחד מסתתר חבר יקר שמתמודד עם האתגר. המטפלות שלנו כאן שפותחות תמיד בזמן, מקבלות הילדים בחיבוק אמיתי בקומה 3 בגן. ויש את המדריכים בזוגון שהקפיאו תואר ראשון, ולמרות הכל הם עובדים קשה כל יום מסביב לשעון. יש פה דוגמנית פרמדיקית, יש פה חשמלאי שהוא טוטיסט, יש את חוגי נגן התופים המחונן שהוא קודם כל טנקיסט. יש לכולם כאב נסתר ואנחנו זועקים בכיכר. יש לנו דף מסרים והמון ביקורים ובדפוס אחד נהדר. ונכון כולם נראים רגילים אבל זה קיבוץ של גיבורי על. בכל אחד מסתתר חבר יקר שמתמודד עם האתגר. וזה לא משנה אם באמצע היום או באמצע ישיבת מזכירות, כולם יעזבו את הכל בשנייה אם יקראו לכיתת כוננות. פה זה לא יקום מקביל או איזה סרט בדיוני, זה הסיפור שלנו, קיבוץ בארי, זה הסיפור שלנו. ונכון כולם נראים רגילים אבל זה קיבוץ של גיבורי על. בכל אחד מסתתר חבר יקר שמתמודד עם האתגר.
משפחת בארי היקרה, עם חיבוק גדול ותקווה לימים טובים יותר. תשמרו על עצמכם, אוהבים אתכם, משפחת התקווה 6.
זה הסיפור שלנו, קיבוץ בארי, זה הסיפור שלנו. ונכון כולם נראים רגילים אבל זה קיבוץ של גיבורי על. בכל אחד מסתתר חבר יקר שמתמודד עם האתגר.
Sorry, it went a little over, but that's all I got. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Uri. Really, thank you, thank you. Whenever Israelis teach in this moment, I'm always in awe of not only your ability to teach so beautifully, but also the strength that it takes to teach this over and over again. And so, toda, thank you so much. And please go get some sleep because I think it's like 3 o'clock in the morning there. But again, thank you. And this was incredibly moving and really deeply appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here and listening. And as we say, bsorot tovot, only good things.
Bezrat Hashem.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, Ori. Bye.